The door wasn't locked. That was the first thing Naomi registered, even as her fingers hesitated on the sleek metal handle. Her neighbor had texted her earlier, Ella, from 3B, asking Naomi to water her plants while she visited her boyfriend in Boston. "Spare key under the mat," the message read. "Or just go in. I never lock it anyway." Naomi had smiled, slipped on her hoodie, and made her way upstairs, barefoot and still in her paint-streaked pajamas. But she must have misread the number. It was Unit 5A she meant to enter. Ella's place. Not 5P. Not the penthouse. Not the private sanctuary of a man she'd only seen in the elevator maybe twice, and who everyone else in the building whispered about like he was a myth. But Naomi didn't know that. Not until after she'd wandered inside, noticed how different it looked, leak, sterile, and drowning in quiet, and shrugged it off, assuming Ella had just done a deep clean. The apartment was bigger than she remembered, and colder. The kind of clean that didn't feel lived in. She passed a glass wall that looked out over the skyline and paused for half a second to take it in. Then she turned down the hall, pushed open the bathroom door, and froze. It was steamy, warm, the mirror fogged and the floor slick with condensation. Someone had clearly just been there. But she hadn't heard anything. She assumed the cleaning service had just left the shower running, so she stepped inside, clutching the watering can like a shield, eyes scanning for a towel to wipe the fog off the mirror. And then it happened. Her foot slipped. It was 1 second of weightlessness, 1 instant of clumsy imbalance, before she crashed onto the warm tile, towel flying from her hand. Her oversized sleep shirt hitched up. She gasped, heart pounding, the embarrassment blooming before the pain did. And that was when he walked in. Damian Reed, the elusive billionaire who owned the penthouse, the building, and half the city if the gossip was true. He was barefoot, in a black t-shirt and sweatpants, hair still damp from the shower. The moment froze. Her on the floor, flushed, sprawled, vulnerable. Him at the door, silent, unreadable, entirely composed. She scrambled to sit up, tugging her shirt down, words tangling in her throat. "I'm sorry, I thought this was someone else's unit." He blinked slowly, assessing her like a riddle he hadn't planned on solving. "You live in 3D, right?" The fact that he knew that startled her more than anything. "Yes," she whispered, mortified. "I was supposed to water my friend's plants. I must have gotten the wrong apartment. I didn't know, I swear I didn't mean to." She clutched the watering can tighter. He stepped into the bathroom without looking away from her. "You're hurt?" She shook her head too quickly. "No, just stupid." His gaze didn't waver. "Stay still." He crouched in front of her, and she noticed for the first time that his eyes weren't cold. They were observant, yes, but there was something tired in them, something older than he looked. He offered his hand. She hesitated, took it. His fingers were warm, firm. He helped her up gently, slowly, as if she might break. Once she was standing, the tension shifted. He let go first. She stepped back. "I'll go," she said. "I'm so sorry." He nodded. "Next time," he said calmly. "Maybe knock first." Her cheeks burned as she backed away, her heart drumming like thunder in her ears. She didn't look back until the elevator doors closed, but when she did, he was still there, watching her. And something in that silence said he wouldn't forget, not soon, maybe not ever. Naomi lived in a 2-bedroom apartment that didn't really feel like it belonged in the same building as the penthouse. The only reason she could afford to live in that complex was because her mother had signed the lease over a decade ago, back when the building was newer, less luxurious, and nowhere near as expensive. After her mother passed, Naomi and her younger sister Layla stayed on under a rent-controlled the management honored, mostly out of obligation and a little PR pressure. They were the only tenants on their floor who didn't have a cleaning service or valet packages. Their door was scuffed, their windows were drafty, but it was home. Naomi wasn't the type to ask for more than what she had. She worked 3 part-time jobs, 2 in the city's underfunded public arts programs and 1 at a tiny frame shop on the Lower East Side. She never went out unless it was to pick up supplies or deliver a commissioned sketch. She didn't wear makeup. She rarely posted on social media. Her world was quiet, inward, and just big enough to fit her sister, her sketchbooks, and a few carefully stacked dreams she never said out loud. She had always been the girl who waited to cross the street until the signal turned green, who apologized for taking up too much space, who lowered her eyes instead of holding someone's gaze. Shy wasn't even the right word for it. Naomi had built a whole identity around being unnoticeable. She had never been kissed, not properly, not in the way movies made it seem slow and electric, filled with meaning. The idea of being touched, seen, wanted, that was reserved for girls louder than her, girls with confidence she couldn't fake, girls who didn't tremble every time a man so much as looked her way. So when she found herself sprawled across the Billionaire's bathroom floor, with Damian Reed's gaze locked on her, she'd felt something fracture inside her, not fear, not shame, something else. Like a thread pulling taut between 2 people who shouldn't be in the same frame, much less the same room. She didn't talk about it afterward, not to Layla, not to anyone. But that night, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, not like she was pathetic or laughable, but like she was unexpected. And that was worse, somehow. Because people like Damian Reed didn't notice girls like Naomi, not in elevators, not in hallways, not in life. Damian, on the other hand, couldn't explain why he hadn't stopped thinking about her. He wasn't in the habit of remembering people, names, yes, faces when necessary, but not people, not soft-voiced, trembling girls who wandered into his bathroom holding watering cans like armor. It should have been forgettable. She should have been forgettable. But something about the way she looked at him that day, half mortified, half defiant, stayed with him. Damian didn't do well with surprises. His life was built around precision, around control. He'd built Reed Industries from a single architectural patent into one of the most respected design and real estate firms on the East Coast. He didn't inherit wealth. He made it. Brick by brick, contract by contract. After his father disappeared when Damian was only 12, his mother had done everything she could to keep them afloat. He'd grown up watching her be dismissed, underestimated, erased, and he'd sworn he would never let anyone hold power over him again. It worked. He became the youngest CEO on the Forbes 500 list by the time he turned 30. Investors called him ruthless, the press called him mysterious, his competitors called him dangerous. But Damian didn't care what they called him as long as they never got close enough to know the difference. He'd been in love once, briefly, enough to know what it cost. Since then, he kept his relationships casual, brief, transactional. Women were drawn to the idea of him, not the man beneath it. They didn't want his silence. They wanted the version of him that existed in headlines. Naomi, however, had walked into his private space without knowing who he was, without expectation, without calculation, and when she'd looked at him, it wasn't awe or hunger in her eyes. It was panic, vulnerability, humanity. Damian didn't understand why that mattered, but it did. The next few days passed quietly. They didn't run into each other. Naomi avoided taking the elevator at peak hours. She timed her grocery runs so they wouldn't overlap, but that Friday, she received a note slipped under her door. It wasn't typed, it was handwritten on thick, clean cardstock. I'm having an issue with the gallery downstairs. Something about a piece I purchased last year. If you're the artist, I have questions. It was unsigned, but she recognized the handwriting from the brief memo she once saw on a delivery box outside the penthouse door. Damian. Her heart thundered. How could he know? How could he possibly connect her with the anonymous art piece she had submitted to that gallery under the name N. Vale? But then again, Damian Reed didn't make guesses. He calculated, he confirmed. She should have ignored it. She should have torn it in half and thrown it out. But instead, she pressed it to her chest, closed her eyes, and whispered the words she never allowed herself to say out loud. Maybe this time, something different could happen. Naomi showed up at the lobby gallery 2 days later, wearing her cleanest jeans and a soft navy cardigan that made her feel less like a girl who scribbled poetry in sketch margins, and more like someone capable of holding eye contact. The assistant at the desk barely looked up as she passed, murmuring, "Mr. Reed's in the viewing room." She paused at the threshold before pushing the door open. Damian stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, studying the painting on the far wall, her painting. It was the only piece she'd ever submitted to a real gallery, a mixed media silhouette layered in charcoal and raw emotion. The gallery owner had accepted it, but didn't ask questions. Naomi hadn't visited since the opening night. She hadn't been able to bear the idea of watching strangers judge it, measure it, or worse, ignore it entirely. But Damian was looking at it like it had something to say. He didn't turn when he spoke. "You submitted under a pseudonym." Naomi stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think anyone would care who made it." "I cared," he said, simply, then turned to face her. "You didn't sign it because you were afraid, not of failure, of being seen." Her mouth went dry. She wasn't used to people naming her fears like that, putting words to things she spent years learning how to hide. "You bought it?" "I did," he replied. "Months ago, I kept it in my study. But last week, the gallery called about transferring ownership paperwork. I wanted to know who you were. I remembered the way you looked at me. It took me a day to connect it, but once I saw your old college portfolio linked to your school's scholarship archive, I knew." Naomi blinked. "You looked me up?" "Of course," he said calmly, not ashamed. "I don't do guesswork. Not when something feels important." She stood still, unsure how to carry the weight of being called important by someone like him. "I'm sorry for intruding that day," she murmured. "I really thought it was my friend's apartment." "I know," Damian said. "I also know that you didn't look away. You wanted to, but you didn't, and I haven't stopped thinking about that moment." The silence between them thickened, not heavy, just full. Naomi shifted slightly. "Why did you want to meet me?" "Because," he said slowly, "for someone who claims to be invisible, you leave a mark." She didn't know what to say, so she didn't. Instead, she stepped beside him, her gaze turning to the painting. "I made this after my mother died. It was the first thing I drew in months. I didn't know how to grieve. I still don't. But it helped." Damian nodded, quiet. "That's what I saw, not the technique, not the framing. The ache." Naomi inhaled. "Is that why you invited me here? To analyze my sadness?" "No," he replied, "to understand why it's the first thing in months that made me feel something." That night they didn't part quickly. Damian walked her to the elevator. Their hands brushed once. Not on purpose, not fully by accident either. Neither pulled away. The next week passed in a blur. Naomi kept painting. She picked up extra shifts, and every other evening, Damian would find a reason to run into her. In the elevator, in the hallway, once even in the laundry room, pretending he didn't have someone who usually handled that for him. Each encounter built something quiet and undeniable between them. A glance that lingered, a half-smile not meant for anyone else. And then, one Thursday night, it shifted. Naomi had been on her balcony, sketchbook in hand, lost in a moment of quiet when she heard the soft clink of a glass 2 stories above. She looked up. Damian stood on his balcony, glass of wine in hand, watching her. She didn't look away. This time, neither did he. "Come up," he called gently. She hesitated, then rose, barefoot, climbing the stairs with a heartbeat like thunder in her chest. When the door opened, he was already waiting. The apartment looked different at night, less pristine, more human. The lights were dimmed, and jazz hummed low from invisible speakers. She stepped inside. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "You are here," he said simply. "That has to mean something." He didn't touch her. He didn't even move closer. He just looked at her like she was a story he'd never expected to read, but couldn't put down. "Can I show you something?" he asked. She nodded. He led her to the back of the apartment, past a row of closed doors, and opened the one at the end. Inside, it wasn't cold chrome or stone. It was wood, bookshelves, plants, a desk littered with hand-drawn blueprints and photos. "This is where I come when the rest of the world feels too loud," he said. Naomi stepped inside carefully. On the wall was her painting, centered, lit, framed in simple black wood. "You put it here?" "Where I can see it every day," Damien said. "It reminds me that stillness isn't the absence of chaos. It's a choice. You made that choice, and it changed something for me." She turned to him slowly. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said, voice steady. "I know that you're more than the girl from 3D. I know that when you think no one's watching, you draw truth on paper. And I know that every time you look at me, I forget why I built walls in the first place." The air thickened. Her breath caught. He stepped closer, just enough for her to feel it. "I won't rush you," he said, "but I need you to know this isn't casual for me. Not anymore." Naomi looked up at him, eyes wide, hands shaking slightly where they clutched her sketchbook. "I've never," she whispered. He nodded gently. "I know. And I'm not someone people choose." "I do," he said, without hesitation. "I'm choosing you, and I'll keep choosing you, whether you believe it yet or not." And that was when she knew this wasn't a mistake. It was a beginning. For the first time in years, Naomi stopped drawing to hide. She started drawing to speak. It was subtle. At first, she left a charcoal sketch in Damien's study the next time she visited, not saying a word about it. He noticed the next morning. It was a line drawing of the city skyline, but softened, as if imagined through the eyes of someone who still believed in second chances. He didn't frame it. He pinned it up with a silver tack beside her original painting. The next day, she found a folded note tucked into the side of her sketchbook. "What does home look like to you?" She didn't answer with words. She answered with pencil. A room with windows, a record player, a mug on the table, and two shadows leaning against each other. She left it on his desk without a signature. The routine took shape without a plan. Damien would find a way to see her, sometimes a knock on her door under the pretense of needing something repaired, other times a delivery misplaced at her unit by mistake. Naomi would pretend not to notice how precise his mistakes were, but she always invited him in. They talked in low voices, usually while Layla was out at class. Naomi told him about her mother's hospital stays, about the way grief sometimes made her hands stop moving for days. Damien told her about his mother's silence, the years she worked until her fingers bled, how he resented her for it and loved her all the same. He never talked about his father, not directly, but Naomi began to sense the way that absence carved space in his life, how it made him obsessive about control, about never needing anyone enough to be left again. And yet, he kept showing up. She started keeping tea in the cabinet in case he stayed late. He started carrying her favorite pencil brand in his drawer, just in case she decided to sketch something again. And in those quiet evenings, when the city pulsed below, and their breath filled the spaces between stories, something began to shift. One night, Naomi fell asleep on his couch, sketchbook on her chest, ink still wet on the edge of the page. Damien didn't wake her. He watched her for a moment, then covered her with a blanket and sat in the chair nearby, pretending to read. He didn't turn a page for 45 minutes. He told himself he was guarding her sleep, not guarding his own heart. Another night, she caught him pacing on the balcony, shoulders tense, jaw tight. When she stepped out, he didn't greet her. He just looked out over the skyline and said, "One of my investors tried to pull me into a merger today, said I was getting distracted lately, said I needed to remember where my priorities are." Naomi didn't speak. She just stepped beside him and waited. After a long silence, he turned to her, eyes unreadable. "What do you think I said to him?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I told him," Damien said, "that if being focused means losing what's real, I'd rather be distracted." That was the first time he kissed her, not dramatic, not hurried, just a soft press of his mouth to her temple, like he didn't know how to ask for more yet, but couldn't hold it back. Naomi's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. "You scare me," she said, "because I don't know what this is or where it's going, because I've never had anything like this, and because I want it too much." "Me too," Damien whispered, "but I'm still here." For weeks they stayed balanced in that quiet orbit, close, careful, but unspoken, until a single moment unraveled it. Damien's mother came to visit unannounced. Naomi happened to be there, barefoot and wearing one of Damien's oversized sweaters, curled up in the reading chair with a tea she'd made without asking. When the door opened, the woman paused, elegant, exacting, with the same storm-gray eyes as Damien, but colder. Naomi froze. Damien stepped between them without missing a beat. "This is Naomi," he said. "She's—" But he didn't finish. His mother looked her over once, then said, "She's not like the others." Naomi blinked. "Excuse me?" "I didn't mean offense," his mother said coolly. "I meant it as an observation. You're different. I can see why he'd hesitate." "Hesitate? About what?" Naomi asked, her voice tighter than she meant. Damien looked away. His mother answered for him. "He's being pressured to formalize ties with someone from the investor board circles, a strategic alignment, they called it. But he stalled. Which isn't like him." Naomi stood slowly. "And you think I'm the reason?" "You are," his mother said, not unkindly. "But don't take that as blame. Take it as proof that he feels something." Damien finally looked at her. "I didn't tell you because I thought I could shut it down quietly. I didn't want you to think you were something I had to explain." Naomi's voice cracked. "But you did hesitate." "Only because I didn't want to hurt you," he said. "But I see now I did anyway." She didn't leave in a storm. She didn't slam doors or shout. She just gathered her things quietly and left. That night, Damien didn't sleep. He walked through his apartment like a ghost, every room a reminder of her. The tea in the cabinet, the pencil on the desk, the drawing on the wall. By morning, he'd made a decision. When the board called to schedule the partnership meeting, he said no. When they reminded him what it could cost, he said it was a price worth paying. "I'd rather be broke with honesty than rich with regret." Naomi didn't know what happened until 3 days later. She came home to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside, a key. To his place, a note. "I won't build a life that doesn't have you in it. This isn't about charity or guilt. It's about love, real love. If you want it, I'm here. If not, I'll let you go. But I needed you to know." Naomi stared at the note until her hands shook. Then she slipped on her shoes, heart racing, and ran. When she knocked on his door, Damien opened it like he'd been waiting on the other side the whole time. "I'm not a contract to sign," she said, breathless. "I'm not an alliance to strengthen." "You're the only truth I've ever wanted," he replied, "and I'm done pretending anything else matters." She didn't answer with words. She stepped forward and kissed him, slow and sure, as if they were writing the first line of a story that finally belonged to both of them. That night, they didn't make promises. They made space, for trust, for breath, for something neither of them had ever known before: peace in the presence of another. The next morning, Naomi woke up to the sound of birds outside the penthouse windows and the scent of fresh coffee in the air. She stirred slowly, unsure for a moment where she was, until she felt the warmth of Damien's arm wrapped around her waist. It was still early, the sun barely rising over the city skyline, casting golden stripes across the floor. She turned slightly to look at him. His features were softened by sleep, lips slightly parted, his hair tousled against the pillow. For a man who was usually so composed, so commanding, he looked remarkably human in that moment, real, tender, vulnerable. She didn't want to move, not yet, so she stayed, her fingers tracing the edge of his forearm, memorizing the stillness. It felt like a beginning. A few hours later, they stood together in the kitchen, Naomi in one of his oversized shirts, Damien in sweatpants and a plain white tee. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was familiar, filled with mutual understanding. "I told them I wouldn't be marrying into their empire," he said, handing her a cup of coffee. "They weren't pleased, but I didn't flinch." Naomi looked at him. "Are you sure?" "There's nothing more certain in my life than you," he replied, and the way he said it made her chest ache with quiet joy. That afternoon, he took her to a studio space on the ground floor of one of his properties, a sunlit room with brick walls, open windows, and an entire corner already filled with art supplies. "It's not much yet," he said, unlocking the door, "but it's yours if you want it." Naomi walked in slowly, overwhelmed. Her fingers grazed a canvas propped against the wall. "Why?" she asked softly. Damien stepped behind her, not touching her, just speaking quietly into the space between them. "Because the world should see what you see, and because love means building something where the other person can breathe." Naomi turned to face him. "You don't owe me this. It's not about owing, it's about offering. I spent years building things for power, for profit. This, us, is the first thing I want to build out of love." She didn't speak for a moment. Then she took his hand and whispered, "Then let's build it together." Months passed, and the change was slow but steady. Naomi's art started to gain attention not because Damien pushed it, but because people felt something when they saw it. There was vulnerability in her strokes, a softness that contrasted against the harsh world outside. And Damien? He began smiling more, laughing more, listening more. His board noticed, the media speculated, but he didn't offer statements. He didn't need to. His actions said everything. On the 1-year anniversary of the night they met, when she stumbled into his bathroom by mistake, Damien brought Naomi back to the same hallway, the one between their apartments. He held her hand, looked into her eyes, and said, "You walked through the wrong door that night." She smiled. "And found the right person anyway." He pulled a small sketchbook from his pocket. Inside, she saw a simple drawing her, standing in his living room, barefoot, holding a mug, looking out the window. "You've always seen me," he said. "I wanted to learn to see you too." Tears pricked her eyes, not from sadness, but from being known so deeply. "What happens next?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Damien leaned in, forehead resting against hers. "Whatever we choose, together." And as the city pulsed around them, as strangers walked past, unaware of the history wrapped in that small moment, Naomi and Damien stood still, two people who were never meant to meet, never meant to fit, but who found in each other the kind of love that doesn't just survive the world, but redefines it. Because in the end, love doesn't always arrive through grand declarations or perfect plans. Sometimes it begins with a wrong door, a quiet night, and a heart brave enough to stay. They didn't rush into what came next. Naomi didn't give up her small apartment next door, and Damien didn't pressure her to YMNTN. Instead, they let the days unfold as they naturally did. Some mornings they woke up in the same bed, tangled in warmth and breath. Other nights they texted each other across the hallway, sending sketches or jokes or quiet thoughts. It was simple, and it was enough. Naomi's studio became more than just a gift. It became a space where she rediscovered herself. She painted long hours in the daylight and sometimes in the dark, and Damien would stop by after work, always unannounced, bringing her favorite tea or standing silently as she worked, watching as if witnessing something sacred. Their love didn't grow with drama, but with small choices. When Naomi's mother called after a long silence, uncertain and unwell, Damien listened to Naomi cry without trying to fix it. When Damien had to let go of a toxic executive from his team, Naomi held his hand afterward, knowing how much it cost him to fire someone who had once been a mentor. They didn't need to speak much about it, they simply stayed. Damien once admitted quietly, as they lay on the couch with a blanket wrapped around them, "Before you, I thought love was a weakness, something that made you vulnerable. But now I think it's the only reason any of this matters." Naomi didn't reply right away. She just turned, kissed his chest gently, and whispered, "Then let's keep mattering." That fall, Naomi held her first exhibition in the studio space. The theme was Accidental Beginnings. Damien arrived early, helping set up chairs and light fixtures, wearing a simple black sweater instead of a suit. People came, friends, artists, collectors, and a few strangers who were moved by the raw honesty of her work. One painting stood out. It was a soft grayscale sketch of two mugs on a windowsill, one slightly chipped, the other pristine. Below it, the caption read, "Mine and his." Someone asked Naomi if it was about balance. She smiled and said, "No, it's about acceptance." By the end of the night, Damien pulled her aside, his hand resting at the small of her back. "You made something real," he said. Naomi leaned into him. "We did." And when the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, he took her hand, brought her to the middle of the empty room, and said, "May I have this dance?" No music played, but they swayed anyway, slow and gentle. Naomi laughed, cheeks warm. "There's no song," she whispered. Damien smiled. "There is. I just only hear it when I'm with you." They danced until the moon was high above the skyline, until their shadows blurred against the brick walls, until the quiet between them felt like the only thing in the world that was still. And long after the last guest left, long after the city fell asleep, Naomi and Damien stood in the space they had created together, not perfect, not planned, but entirely theirs. Because some love stories don't begin with fairy tales or grand entrances. They begin in silence, in mistakes, in the courage to look at someone across a room and choose to stay. Naomi had once been the girl who drew to escape the world. Damien had once been the man who built walls to keep it out. But together, they learned that love isn't about safety. It's about surrender. And sometimes, the most beautiful beginnings happen exactly where you never thought to look. On the anniversary of their first unexpected encounter, Damien surprised Naomi with something quiet but meaningful. He led her back to the hallway between their apartments, the place where it all started. It hadn't changed much, still lined with the same walls, still lit by the soft glow of overhead lights, still just an ordinary corridor to anyone else, but to them it had become a threshold, a moment, a before and after. Damien stopped in front of her old door and handed her a small, neatly wrapped box. Inside was a key. She looked up, confused. "It's not to the penthouse," he said. "It's to the studio. I put your name on the lease. It's yours now, fully." Naomi's lips parted slightly, her voice caught between surprise and emotion. "Why?" He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Because love should give you room, not take it away. and you've never once asked for anything, but you've given me everything." Naomi didn't know what to say, so instead, she stepped into his arms and held him. No words, no promises, just presence. That night, as they lay on the couch watching the soft flicker of city lights from the window, Naomi whispered, "Do you think people ever really change?" Damien didn't answer right away. He thought about the man he used to be, the one who measured his worth in acquisitions and control, who let silence fill the spaces where love should have been. Then he thought about the man he was now, the one who left meetings early to walk Naomi home, who learned the language of her quietness, who finally knew that strength wasn't about walls, but about being willing to open the door again. "I don't think we change," he said finally. "I think we uncover who we were before the world told us to hide it." Naomi turned toward him, eyes soft. "And what did you uncover?" He smiled faintly. "That I was always waiting for you." She pressed her forehead to his and closed her eyes. "Then maybe we were both waiting." In the months that followed, they didn't chase headlines. They didn't announce their love with grand gestures or social media posts. Instead, they lived it quietly, honestly. Naomi began mentoring a few young artists who reminded her of herself, shy, unsure, but burning with something inside. Damien started speaking less in boardrooms and more in classrooms, giving guest lectures on failure, growth, and the human side of business. He told stories, not strategies. He brought vulnerability to a world that feared it, and when people asked him why he changed, he always said the same thing. "Because someone reminded me that love isn't weakness, it's the reason we survive." On the second anniversary of Naomi's first art show, Damien proposed, not with a crowd, not with a ring, but in the studio, at golden hour, with her favorite sketch pinned on the wall behind them. "Marry me," he said, "not because we need to, but because I want to keep choosing you every morning." Naomi said yes, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. They didn't rush the wedding. They didn't plan a lavish ceremony. They simply made a promise to keep building together. One quiet morning, months later, Naomi stood at the window of their new home, a place they chose together, neither too big nor too small, and watched the sun rise over the city. Damien stepped behind her, arms wrapping around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Still drawing the world?" he asked. She smiled, still trying to make it softer. He kissed her cheek and whispered, "You already have." Because in the end, love isn't about grand beginnings. It's about the ordinary moments that become extraordinary because of who you share them with. It's the art made in silence. The key slipped into a hand without expectation, the hallway that became a doorway, and the courage to walk through it, even when you're not sure where it leads.